emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus. You have accessed entry 866.DE3233. Certificate number 13766. One glass of red wine.
Alcohol has come up in the Omnibus archive before, although
when?
Perhaps mostly by its absence.
When do you and I ever talk about alcohol?
Yeah, I think the negative space around alcohol, like two faces looking at each other, but instead of a vase in the middle, it looks like a cocktail glass.
Although I did mistakenly do that single malt.
You did that show about Scotch.
Yeah, episode where I got so many bearded actuallys. They basically actually means death.
Well, this is the show when the wine nerds turn on me with notes of resentment and scorn,
leather and cedar,
sumac and fury. Because we don't drink, but
neither of us. You mean you and I? Neither of us.
By
drink.
we, did you think I meant
we?
Gen X
the great we?
We, yeah, the royal we.
No, but I want to make sure that we emphasize that you and I, neither of us drink, but for very different reasons.
I don't drink because I've never drunk.
You've never had alcohol.
You don't drink because you already drank everything.
I had all the alcohol.
It's all gone. You can't find it anymore.
And somehow we met in the middle, and here we are.
I mean, just to be clear to our distant future listeners, there was a quirk of our species was that a little bit of ethanol would really mess with our brain chemistry if we ingested it.
It would make us so vivacious at parties for the first hour and a half after we started drinking.
See, this is the thing. Like, am I the kind of person who, I think, I'm a sober-minded person. I would not enjoy the lack of control that came with a mood-altering substance like that. But maybe I just have to try it once, and then I'm like, oh no, the descriptions don't do it justice. This is the buzz I've always wanted. I'm nearly, I'm so at ease and mellow and nearly ecstatic.
Having been to, multiple parties at your house, I feel like your and Mindy's inhibitions are what make the parties so successful.
Wait, what?
Yeah, the fact that
Our inhibitions?
Yeah, you're both
bad hosts.
Vibrating at a level of inhibition that's just like just scintillating.
Wait, how is that even conveyed at a party? We're
Well,
always telling people, use a coaster.
Yeah.
Use a coaster.
No, I mean, you're walking around the party pretty sternly waving your spatula at people and, and serving up. Like your parties, you'll have 20 people, but you'll make 60 hamburgers, which feels like an expression of your personality somehow. There's always 60 hamburgers.
Because we shop at Costco.
And there are only, 25 people.
I feel like we don't always go that far over, but...
well, if you count hot dogs as hamburgers.
If you count hot dogs as hamburgers, it's anarchy. I mean, there's just a time lag. Like, I'm furiously like, the meat's going as fast as I can serve it, but at some point, I'm going to put on a new set of burgers that are superfluous.
Right, 10 burgers too many.
The superfluous burgers.
I do feel like if you and Mindy were both like, whatever.
But you're making it sound like if we host people, it's a drag because we're not drinking. Or maybe because nobody's drinking.
No, that's the thing. 75% of the guests at your party are also not drinking and also vibrating with all of their inhibitions, and it's the fun of the party. It's totally like exciting.
Well, this is what I'm interested in because I don't sense this.
Right.
And like I spent my whole life kind of waiting to be in a social situation where it's a huge drag that I'm not drinking. And I kind of thought, you know what? It's actually overstated. Like nobody really notices or cares if I'm having a Coke. And what you're saying is they do, and I'm just not noticing it.
No, it's that you have found a way to have the vast majority of your social experiences be in environments where most of the people aren't drunk.
That's true. Because I am in plenty of situations where a lot of people are drinking, you know, dinner, cocktail party, some mixer at a bar, some reception. But it's true that those are not occasions where everyone is there to have 6 drinks and the lack of inhibition that follows.
Or even if they are, you're back at the hotel by 10.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I missed the problem drinkers.
So for me, I had the opposite effect, which was that I surrounded myself with people who were super duper wasted and high all the time. And what I didn't realize was that
For me, that would be aversion therapy. I'd be like, I will never drink having seen this.
What happened was I didn't realize that I was cycling through groups of people who were only really wasted 2 days a week because then they went to work, but they were replaced by, in my life, with other people who didn't work on Mondays and Tuesdays.
Where are my Tuesday, Wednesday binge drinkers at?
And so I thought that everybody was wasted all the time, but it was only me who was wasted all the time. Me and my super cadre of like committed
drinkers.
Committed wastoids. I mean, most of those people were committed drinkers. It was just that they also managed to hold down a job, which I did not.
So now that you are a post drinker,
Yeah.
I mean, is that an okay to say?
I think post drinker is good.
Okay. Is it like, do you still notice that you're, like, do you have my perception of I'm not drinking and it's fine? Or do you have the memory of I'm not drinking and they notice I'm not drinking and it's way less fun than it used to be? I'm not drinking and in an hour I'm going to be sick of them. Like, because I honestly have the perception of it has not affected my life one bit.
Well, here's why. Because when I stopped drinking, what I noticed was, first of all, not everybody is drinking all the time. That was the first revelation.
You just assumed.
Yeah. I met all these people who were artists, actors, and musicians who didn't have drug problems, which was like it blew my mind. How could you also be an actor or a musician?
They didn't assign you a drug problem?
And they didn't have they were just like, oh, I had a couple of drinks. I was like, wow, it's like when you meet people who can smoke 4 cigarettes at a bar and then not touch cigarettes for 2 weeks. It's like, wow, astonishing. But then what I really realized is that people start drinking at dinner and it does make them more loquacious. It reduces their social anxiety up to about 10 p.m. And you'll notice it in any social situation. There's a moment when the volume in the room goes up by 25% because everybody's talking louder now. Mm-hmm. And bars know this. They turn the lights down at a certain point and they turn the music up. And it happens in most bars at a certain hour.
I see it in restaurants on a table-by-table basis. You can really tell that's the table that just ordered a third bottle.
Exactly. And then what you reach is the law of diminishing returns kicks in. And you're like, oh, now we're at the level where everybody's jamming, everybody's buzzed, and they all think that they're fascinating, and everybody's having a blast, and people are kind of touching each other more, like patting one another. And, it's just like, oh, and then you've got an hour and a half before it becomes intolerable. Because as the volume keeps going up, all of a sudden you've got people, and the room just goes to shit. And at that point, I'm back at the hotel. Yeah, and because I was in rock and roll, I had to stay until 2 a.m., but I had a job, right? So there were people falling down drunk and on drugs all around me all the time, every night. But I had a job to do, so I didn't feel like, oh, I wish I was.
Let me ask you this. Is the good, speaking as the cool, detached scientist observing these dissipated revelries.
Sure.
Is the good hour and a half actually good, like to the outside observer? Or does it just feel like, is it a good vibe, but the conversation isn't actually any more insightful? The relationships aren't actually warmer. I mean,
the the relationships probably are a little bit warmer. The conversation's not any more interesting, but
it just feels like it is.
But what you see is that moment where the people that normally are reticent or normally kind of wouldn't reveal anything about themselves or wouldn't feel accessible it is kind of fun. And I think the vibe of a room also plays into it.
Yeah.
The whole room feels buzzing. So you feel like, oh, this is a cool place, and I'm cool for being in this cool place. It's you've walked into places where it's like, wow, this place is just going.
Yeah.
If you zoom in on any one conversation, you're like, oh, it's just some boring person talking loud.
There's also the sense on their part that the non-drinkers are a stick in the mud that may not be true. It may be their perception, like I need you to be as loud as me, as uninhibited as me, or I feel a little bit like I'm at a disadvantage.
That thing where you start to feel like non-drinkers are a drag.
Yeah.
That's
called alcoholism.
Well, yeah, only certain people are doing that.
Okay.
Only certain people have that vibe. Most people don't. Most people don't know if you're
you're
drinking.
Right?
No, it's just a certain person who wants you to validate their consumption of booze, and when you won't,
I won't enable them.
Yeah, then you're a drag, and you really are a drag because they're looking around. They want another drink, and they're looking around to get reinforced. I noticed it a lot traveling, that when you pull into a local bar, like a village bar, and there's 9 people sitting at the bar who just are there every afternoon drinking.
Yeah.
And you walk up and you're like, I'll have a ginger ale. They're all not impressed because they have committed to spending their lives in this bar. And just the fact that you're over sitting in the corner, writing in your journal with a freaking ginger ale is it's really disruptive to them.
I mean, having been raised with non-drinking, like not just as a healthy lifestyle choice, but as a matter of religious importance.
And it's
due to a Mormon upbringing,
a social binding agent, right?
Yeah, for sure. But I was just raised to think that the world was just a battlefield of people who were going to care deeply how much I was drinking or what I was drinking and what, and try to seduce me into the devil's ways. Yeah. And I'm very disappointed that it never happened.
Yeah.
How have I been living wrong that everyone just lets me have my ginger ale or my cranberry juice and spritzer and nobody cares?
Well, you also dodged the 2 middle brow cultures of rich people or of well-to-do people, the young ones and the kind of what would you call guys that have man caves who are drinking the single malt scotches, where they have converted booze into a luxury item.
Yeah, it's a personality feature. It's
and it's just
a fetish object.
Yeah, it's like having a sports team, but it's refined. It's cultured,
right?
And that didn't used to be true. I mean, Scotch wasn't cultured. Cognac was cultured. Scotch was just what but it has become that. And then wine, of course, has always been a thing. And my family owns a vineyard. So I spent a lot of time, and by family I mean extended family. I have no interest in it.
Your 13-year-old is not on a vineyard. I get it.
No, but my uncle had a very extensive wine cellar that had a lot, and spent time in France in the 60s and 70s learning about viticulture, and was one of the first people to start growing grapes in the Dundee area in Oregon, and was a pioneer of the Oregon wines.
I think we did talk about this.
Yeah. And so his name is on a plaque somewhere in Oregon as one of the original
Everyone's
Pinot
name is on
Noir
a plaque somewhere
in Oregon. He was a Pinot Noir grower and, brought that stuff from France. And
what era is this?
70s.
Okay.
60s and 70s. When most of Oregon was still just, I don't know what, deer and lumberjacks.
Spotted owls.
And some weed growers on the deep in the forest.
In the clearings.
So I spent a lot of time as a kid standing around in groups of adults who were using wine as a signifier, who were steaming drunk, but had to maintain a lot of dignity because this was an art form.
This was not a
They weren't
lifestyle
here to get,
problem.
Yeah, they weren't here to get drunk. They were here, because they were Epicureans.
And there's notes of
saddle leather,
coffee and saddle leather.
But they were faced, and so that vibe, that country club wasp vibe of really drunk people who are, literally like steam is coming off of them, but they're maintaining decorum. That's a huge vibe. Talk about suppression and inhibition.
Well, it's a huge part of the story I'm going to tell here about how wine functioned for a certain class of Americans and how the broader cultural view of alcohol was really shaped by that sense of decorum. But here's what good, well-behaved drinking looks like in the public square.
And it's all post-war, right?
Yeah, in America, for sure. Because this is what, when I say I've never felt any absence due to drinking, there really is the absence of not being able to drink wine with dinner.
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned, there's a class connotation of here's what is done and here's what refined people do.
It's smart
during their nice evenings.
But it suggests a world. Yes. Right? Of experience.
You're well traveled. You have as you say, you have the wine cellar, you have a palate, and there's really today in our increasingly sober curious America, there are actually people experimenting with wine and cocktail substitutes. But for most of my life, that was not a thing. If you didn't drink wine with dinner, you looked like a little kid with a sippy cup of apple juice.
It's still that stuff. I've tried all that.
Oh yeah.
And it's
terrible.
It's all awful. It's really garbage. If you've stopped drinking, just leave it alone. Leave it behind.
And if you don't drink, don't think that the weird herbal Tom Collins you just ordered is anything like a Tom Collins.
I went over to our friend of the show, Jason Finn's house the other day, and he brought out his herbal vodkas, gins, whiskeys.
Is he also a post drinker, or is this just for your benefit?
Well, I won't speak to anyone else's status of drinking or post drinking, but he had all these bottles because he was an Epicurean. Trying out all these different liqueurs. Well, not liqueurs, boozes, just no booze in them.
Are they boozes then?
And he made me a Negroni, a gin and tonic, all these mixed drinks, and they were universally terrible. And he had some of those bottles were like $80, like a truly fine whiskey, and it just it's just. It's weird. I mean, I guess you'd get used to it, and it's like anything. It's delicious.
There's always been a mocktail culture of, just make me a pina colada and leave out the stuff, and it doesn't have rum, but now it just tastes like pineapple juice, and nobody likes it. You're just having an orange Julius, basically. And but there was some recent thing in the last 5 to 10 years where the future should know that people decided to put really weird botanicals, thinking that the weird mouthfeel of botanical would simulate ethanol in your mouth and brain, and it's not just the brain part. It doesn't in your mouth either, I think, from what I understand. The idea is I'm eating something weird that I shouldn't eat. Is chewing on a leaf the same as whatever I sense in a scotch or something?
I quit drinking when I was 26. So I never had, and very poor. So I never had the experience of drinking fine booze, except wine, because I would go to my family events and take some bottle of wine that probably belonged on a shelf and sneak out back and duke it. But I wasn't appreciating it really. And then every once in a while I would be in a situation where I'd have nice booze, but only by accident. It didn't matter to me. If my booze came in a plastic jug with a big handle on it, I was just as happy as, so I never had the
3 X's.
I never had the experience of, either actually experiencing or pretending to experience, like, oh, this is amazing. You really you feel that, taste those notes of peat. But I always felt like alcohol's terrible. All of it is really terrible. It's an acquired taste, like a lot of terrible things.
Yeah.
And you acquire it, and then you believe that it's delicious at some level, but it's terrible.
I mean, back to the ancient Greeks, many people, probably before that, many people have thought there was a near religious ecstasy that came with alcohol. That's why alcohol is still used in rituals from communion to Seder to, all over the place.
Oh, I highly recommend alcohol.
Don't get me wrong.
It just doesn't matter if it's good or bad quality because
nobody's drinking for the taste.
A lot of people are, but I never really I thought that was all a pose. You're drinking to get the buzz.
Right. It's a necessary evil that it tastes like that. Luckily I never got past the first mouthful of like beer tastes like piss, and
we're going to get terrible letters. We're going to get our Facebook page to the Futurelings who are looking at our archived Futurelings arguments. All of the people that are mad that I jokingly put Susie Quattro in the Ramones are going to be quadruple mad.
Wait, is this your worst? You put Susie Quattro in the Ramones?
Yeah, don't you? Susie Ramone, they called her.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
The girl Ramone.
No, you know how it is on the Futurelings site where everybody's fine with us goofing around until we say something that they really know about
on their specific area.
And they're like, "How dare they?" But yeah, there are going to be booze people that argue vociferously against the point I'm trying to make.
And the sense that, and I think there's a broader point, maybe that, nobody drinks thinking that it's good for them either, with the exception of a kind of a brief interregnum that we're going to discuss in our lifetimes. I don't know if there's really been a time when, maybe you had 19th century people writing about the no doubt salubrious effects of the grape. But I think in general, there's a sense that the harms of drinking have always outweighed its. Obviously,
there were those late 19th century patent medicines where it was basically booze, but
that was a con inflicted by the quack. The person drinking it wasn't like, oh yeah, this just feels better because this is corn liquor. Of course, I feel better. Like they weren't in on the gag.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you're in a time before modern biology and medicine, you're not going to understand the connection between drinking and cirrhosis.
Right.
But you might be able to see even whether this is ancient Greece or the American frontier, you're going to be very familiar with the fights that result, relationship between crime and poverty. You're going to see addiction. You're going to see many of the effects of alcohol in extremis. You're going to see DTs and you're going to see wet brain. And so there would have been some even ancient understanding, I think, that there's a downside to this, no matter how good the grape feels.
Yes, although the conventional wisdom about medieval times was that beer was safer to drink than water.
That's right.
Right? Because you could get sick from water, whereas I guess beer. So all that sort of quaffing of ale all day was healthier than getting dysentery.
No soft drinks. You couldn't just have a Coke.
That's right.
Fewer options. In ancient Egypt, the kids drank beer, because that's how you got your carbs.
In modern France, northern France.
But in America in particular, we're a country that has flirted with temperance
a lot
more than most. And you might associate that with Carrie Nation swinging a hatchet in the early 20th century. But the 1980s were also kind of a time of, not prohibition, but neo-prohibition. This was the ascendancy of MAD, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and other advocacy groups like that who had really done a bang-up job portraying alcohol as a gateway drug,
right?
And making sure that kids knew about some of these statistical dangers. And
see, now we're going to get a lot of people commenting from the marijuana community who are saying, oh, alcohol's way worse than pot.
Alcohol, by the numbers, is way worse than pot.
Absolutely 100% agree. It was worse for me than pot.
But it doesn't smell as much on the bus, so there are some
or just on every street corner in Seattle.
And this actually led to concern in industries, including the wine industry. You know, Coke and Nestle had big vineyard investments that they sold off in the
really?
80s because, you know, the sense that wine was not going anywhere.
Is that why we don't see Paul Masson anymore?
Was that the corporate owned?
Paul Masson and what was it? We will sell no wine before it's time. The Orson Welles.
Yeah, that's called what is that?
What was that?
All I can think of is Bartles and James.
It was another, you know, big box wine
that had TV commercials.
Yeah, wine with TV commercials. We don't see that as much.
But the 80s were a particularly bleak time for the future of wine. I don't know how it was for your Pinot Noir growing, because he got into reds, you know, before it was cool. But I wonder if the 80s were kind of a fallow time for the family business.
Well, Oregon hadn't yet exploded. It was where the real the American connoisseurs. But you know, there was a moment, a watershed moment, when Oregon wines were rated. You know, they won several competitions against French wines. That's
just a few decades after the same revolution in California. Because for most of the American history, Californian wines were not good, and then suddenly one bottle wins one prize, and
all of a sudden it's a
over.
whole. Yeah.
In Oregon, only the whales were exploding at the time.
That's right. We haven't done an episode on exploding whales.
I'm sure it'll be coming. But this all started to change. The watershed evening when America's 1980s prohibition mindset, at least what the young were being fed, started to shift. On November 17th, 1991, America sat down.
Wasted that day. I can almost
you were already wasted.
What day was it? September?
It would have been a Sunday night, November 17th, 1991. And I know it was Sunday because Americans all sat down to 60 Minutes. You know, this is in America where 30 million people are all watching 60 Minutes, and this can really change the discourse. And Morley Safer, God rest his soul. Is Morley Safer dead? Let's say he is doing a piece called The French Paradox. Yes, he died in 2016. The French Paradox, you might be familiar with,
Every time you say Morley Safer, all I think is Harry Reasoner.
No, Harry Reasoner is kind of the white-haired, gravelly voice. This is the jowly Canadian.
But you remember they said,
order, yeah.
With Harry Reasoner,
I'm Mike
Morley
Wallace.
Safer. That's right.
I'm Harry Reasoner. It was almost in order of, it was like succession to the cabinet, because the most recently hired ones were last.
Except for Andy Rooney.
Andy Rooney is Homeland Security. He's always last. Andy Rooney is Veterans Affairs. But yeah, you could tell their seniority. It's like the College of Cardinals.
Only anyone past a certain age is going to know what the hell we're talking about.
Nobody knows what we're talking about.
But this was the 60 Minutes television show.
A stopwatch is ticking.
And we all watched it every Sunday?
Every Sunday night.
Every Sunday night.
Real investigative journalism. And that was the first and only place you would find out about a crooked employer or a buried scandal in some industry or...
Yeah, and people would get interviewed, and halfway through they'd realize, oh, wait a minute, this isn't a puff piece.
This is 60 Minutes. What was I thinking? Safer's piece that night is titled The French Paradox, and it's about a kind of enduring cultural mystery, which is why the French, despite eating a famously rich, fatty diet full of sauces and butter and pig's heads and duck confit and blood sausage.
Right. 9 courses.
Do not have
heart
disease, cardiovascular health problems to the degree that Americans do. And
it's red wine flushing out all the bad fats.
Well, this is kind of what Morley Safer lands on, despite the fact that there's a million other things you could discuss, behavioral differences between the French and Americans, many obvious.
Tiny portions,
smaller portions, more cigarettes. He is able to find a bunch of largely French medical researchers who want to pin it on wine.
It's sex. It's all the uninhibited sex.
Right. We're having inhibited sex, which, as everyone knows, does not get your heart pumping the right way.
No, we only have sex through a sheet, whereas the French are having sex with their neighbors.
Not through a sheet.
Crucially, not through a sheet.
The sheet is what keeps your Fitbit from registering all those healthful reps. Serge Reynaud is a doctor and medical researcher in Lyon, France, where Morley has gone to to say to French people, but what's up? Look at all this butter. What is up with you? And he says, I think it is the alcohol. And he's going back to research that really begins seriously in 1974. California cardiologist does his first research trying to see the effects of alcohol on cardiovascular health, and he's surprised to find that it's people who abstain from alcohol, it's teetotalers, who have the highest rate of heart attacks.
California cardiologist. All I see is Porsche 911s. It's the only thing I can think of. California cardiologist, Porsche 911.
This guy's a researcher. Maybe he's not. Maybe he's not actually making
Porsche
911 money. And there's been research along these lines before, but he's the guy. The problem is the research is often confounded by the fact that people who drink more smoke more, and so it's hard to tease out, which of this heart attack risk is actually the cigarettes and not the.
Yeah, they're also having fun. They probably ski more.
This guy makes an attempt to. He doesn't correct for skiing, but he corrects for smoking, and he publishes the first thing saying, "Hey, actually, it's possible that not drinking is bad for your heart." A Honolulu heart study conducted between 1977 and 1980, kind of a longitudinal thing of Japanese American men who have moved away from a traditional Japanese diet toward a Western diet, makes the same surprising finding that a little bit of drinking actually seems to be good for heart health.
Is the idea there that the Japanese don't drink? Because let me disabuse you of that.
Maybe they're adopting a Western diet and drinking less.
Or drinking wine.
Yeah, maybe they're switching.
No, they drank wine. But.
They're switching from rice wine to grape wine. A 1986 study in Framingham, Massachusetts, actually finds that moderate drinking lowers your risk of cardiovascular events by 40%.
Oh, wow.
And this is the study that starts to discover what's become known as the J curve, that there's this cardiopositive effect. Because if you graph alcohol intake with cardiovascular health, you will see that there's a baseline when people don't drink, and then cardiovascular incidents go down. The health goes up as you drink a little bit, but then the J curves around. Then as the drinking becomes less moderate and more excessive, then cardiovascular health goes way down. But there's a narrow sweet spot between no drinking and too much drinking, a sensible amount of drinking that appears to increase your heart health.
Sensible drinking.
Two words that always go together. And it's long been known that alcohol intake can cause, produces more of the good kind of cholesterol in the body. And there starts to become theorizing that maybe it's even a solvent, that it's able to remove fatty deposits from arterial walls.
Yes.
That your platelets are just loving it because the alcohol is just, scooping you out like Drano.
Oh, yeah, it's attaching itself to, this was an era when we were all excited about things attaching themselves to other things and sweeping them out.
Yes, that's what the 80s were called.
Yeah.
The sweep you out generation. In this study, in fact, is so, but at this time of anti-alcohol propaganda, or I don't want to say hysteria because it's actually not bad to be against kids drinking. But at the time, the discourse is such that this study is actually suppressed. Nobody wants to publish it. And for 14 years, nobody finds this guy's Massachusetts finding that
really
that there's a 40% decrease.
14 years.
14 years, nobody publishes this. But in 1991, with Morley Safer saying it on national TV, what has been bubbling up in the medical journals, that what if a little bit of red wine is good? This knocks America on its butt. They have gotten permission from
Keister is the word we used at the time.
on their tush,
on their tushy,
on their derriere. You know what my kids love is that in the 80s we used to say buns. It knocks
Buns.
America on its buns. Remember how in the 80s everybody wanted to compliment somebody's buns or to have a nicer set of buns via
buns.
a VHS tape?
I feel like maybe that was a thing that you saw when porno mags kind of exploded from just your usual Penthouse and Playboy to like all these new titles.
Specialties.
Yeah, and I think there might have
Buns
even been a
magazine.
Buns magazine.
My kids hate when we use buns, ironically. Anyway, America was knocked on its buns. The next day, magazines report that you cannot get a glass of red wine on any airline, on any flight on any airline in America. Wine sales spike 40% overnight.
No kidding.
overnight. And every time that episode airs again, the wine industry sees a similar 40%.
This feels like
spike.
insider trading. I bet Morley Safer had like wine futures.
Morley Safer probably had a personal interest in feeling good about his glass of wine with dinner.
That's what people don't remember about 60 Minutes is a lot of them were whimsical. The ones that weren't like nailing somebody to the carpet.
There was always one that was like, now Diane Sawyer is going to interview Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
You know, or here's a fun thing about a new kind of road bike sweeping the country. You know, they had a lot of that kind of middle brow cultural phenomenon stuff.
So,
and this is a feel good story because the secret of the French is they're drinking a glass of wine with dinner, and you're not, maybe every day.
On this show, I don't usually interject with a personal anecdote.
No, this would be unprecedented. Are you going to break with a protocol and do so here?
I'm just going to say that this, I remember this moment in 1990, January 2nd of 1990, I recognized that I had been in a lot of trouble and had kept waking up in jail.
And alcohol had not been the solution yet.
And I realized that, that as I said at the time, I have never woken up in jail because I smoked too much pot. And so January 2nd of 1990, I said, I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to keep doing drugs because those are not a problem for me. But alcohol is. That's the real poison.
I didn't know the timeline here.
Yeah.
You're worried about alcohol, but because presumably,
I mean, what the hell, it's God made the mushrooms, and by extension, God did
not make the heroin.
No, well, he made
the poppy.
He made the opium.
He made the people who figured out how to turn it into heroin.
But alcohol had become this was during an era too where we were very suspicious of big industry, and there was no big weed or big LSD, right. There was big cocaine, but it seemed cooler than big alcohol. So I quit, and it wasn't until the summer of 1991 that I realized that my drug habit was actually causing me pretty significant,
contrary to popular belief,
pretty significant side effects in terms of my ability to like cope with others and deal with life and hold down a job and these things. And so summer of 91, I said, you know what? Alcohol is a lot less destructive in so many other ways. Maybe I should stop leaning so heavily on drugs and go back to
switched back
booze
to your first love.
And so I started drinking again. The sad thing I didn't realize was that I didn't stop doing drugs. I had also developed, drug habits. So then I was just adding alcohol to it. But I remember this era where suddenly there was a lot of normies were like, alcohol is actually good for you.
It changed overnight.
Yeah. And it really did have the effect, because I also spent a lot of time in AA meetings later. And
did this era produce a lot of AA attendees?
Well, no, but addicts are always looking for a rationalization. And so we had this period where all the normie culture was like, no, booze is good for you. And we were like, yes, also is cocaine. So there was, I very distinctly remember like this pow. And of course in Seattle, 1991 was
also pow. It was
pow. And a lot of people were dying of heroin overdoses. So the idea
if they had switched to just a nice Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yeah. 7 bottles of wine is at least better than dying in a bathtub.
And it was, I hadn't really thought about, you realize the cultural footprint of Alcoholics Anonymous at this time, creating this idea that it's not just MAD, it's these addiction recovery groups doing worthy work that are creating this correct idea in people's minds that there is a specter looming ahead for those who drink too much.
The very first cultural moment when being an alcoholic was no longer, it was still shameful, but it was no longer something that you would lose your job.
Yeah.
If people realized that you had stopped drinking.
The Tom Brokaw remembered that Morley Safer got more phone calls that night than like any other piece he had ever done.
From a bunch of drunks.
Yeah,
hey, Morley.
I mean, there's that, but there's also people, casual drinkers who are able to feel better about it. It turns out there was a country full of people drinking wine with dinner and thinking, should I be drinking wine with dinner? Who are now like, I should be drinking wine with dinner because Morley Safer says so.
What's amazing about that anecdote is in 1991, Morley Safer's phone number was widely available.
Yeah, people weren't looking him up in the phone book. These are well-wishers in the industry, I'm sure. But, there is a small American cultural decision-making body, and they were delighted because suddenly the New York Times is running headlines on, is red wine good for you? Is it because of resveratrol, this antioxidant that's found in grape skins, that's a natural antioxidant. It's a bodily cleanser.
Resveratrol?
Resveratrol. And the idea being that red wine in particular might be better because it's got more of the grape skin in it, and that's where the good antioxidants are. Wine bottles started to have little neck tags actually advertising their health benefits. And in fact, this was backed up by the U.S. government. The Department of Health and Human Services and the USDA, the Agriculture Department, jointly put out nutritional guidelines. I'm sure we'll do the food pyramid at some point on Omnibus. And suddenly in the 4 years after this, in 1995, I think they drop all anti-alcohol language from their official U.S. health guidance. And a lot of public safety people and nutrition people don't like this at all.
Right.
The U.S. government is now officially agnostic on whether drinking is good for you or bad, but people notice, the New York Times is now doing big headlines, and the intelligentsia class is thinking, well, this is the thing to know, that healthy people don't drink. And there's new research is being done on, is it good for diabetes? It turns out one study finds that all-cause mortality, all death rate goes down 20% in the case of moderate but not excessive drinking.
Oh,
and this is
that's the thing that we conveniently ignored as we drink a bottle of Bushmills every night. What is excessive drinking really?
Were
there guidelines?
Well, yeah. This is kind of the all the research that's coming out of France is like, yeah, the J curve says, drink a few drinks a week, drink a glass of wine a day, and this kind of becomes, you should be drinking a glass of wine with dinner, to the degree that in the New York Times, the Assistant Secretary of Health, Philip Lee, is saying that wine with meals in moderation is beneficial. And in fact, there was a significant bias in the past against drinking, that we're correcting the bad old think that drinking was dangerous. And we need to get rid of these prejudices and clear our minds and realize that a delicious glass of wine with dinner is clearly helpful.
There was a Seattle rock musician, not from Seattle, but a Seattle transplanted rock musician, who was at the time one of the most famous rock musicians in the world, who at one of the local bars that was like the cool rock bar, he would carry around a red Solo cup, and he would go up to the bar, and because he, was well known, he would hand them the cup and he'd say, just top it off. And he was drinking red wine. And throughout the night, he would have them just top it off. And so he would claim that he'd only had 2 glasses of red wine. But
in fact, 1 Solo cup of red wine. The container never changed.
But my roommate was the bartender, and he said that routinely it was 5 bottles of wine that went through that red Solo cup in the course of a night.
Is this who I think it is?
It may be.
You write it on a piece of paper and show it to me? Okay.
He later had trouble in the
famously. You could find a news article about it. Yeah, you're only drinking 1 glass.
It's only 1 glass, and just topping it off.
Well, even the French knew you couldn't just keep putting more wine in the glass and call that 1 glass.
But
they have a better educational system than we do.
As I say, it was the
right.
times. Yeah.
And because it's wine, it's not bad.
It's great.
There's a weird kind of classist angle here where nobody is defending a can of beer with the game. They're defending a glass of wine with your nice dinner, because this is who this is reaching. Kind of this new bougified, yuppified late 80s middle class that wants to be told that because its tastes seem cultured, they must be healthy and in fact a higher moral good. It's good for the wine industry. There were 800 wineries in California at the time Morley Safer does his story. A decade later, that number goes to 1,950. It more than doubles. And
I should say that no one can drink 5 bottles of wine in one sitting. That was an exaggeration, and I'm just thinking about the
you don't
people
want
that are yelling at me.
You don't want people to think you're giving them a dare.
5 bottles of wine. I mean, you could.
Do college kids listen to podcasts? Is someone right now trying this? Stop. Please stop.
Please.
There's no way you're on the 5th bottle yet.
Please, fraternity people, stop trying this. And please, people who are already halfway through composing an angry letter to me, stop. I see you. I feel your anger. You don't have to complete this post.
This reversal, this wish fulfillment of upwardly mobile middle-class Americans being told their wine taste is good actually becomes prescriptive. A doctor named R. Curtis Ellison is quoted in Wine Spectator magazine as saying, "You should consume alcohol on a regular basis, perhaps daily." Do you know how different that was from Gen X childhood? The fact that a scientist would be saying, he is saying it in Wine Spectator, but he's wagging his finger and saying you should consume alcohol on a regular basis. Some might even say that it is dangerous to go more than 24 hours without a drink. Can you imagine what you're doing to your circulatory system if you were to go a full day without a delicious Merlot? The damage might be irreversible.
Yes.
So this starts to get so far into propaganda so fast and so far ahead of any actual factual finding.
Now, how much of this do you feel like is Wine Spectator and their partners in crime?
We now know. I was just reading a great article that I think Tim Reckwarth wrote in Slate about this moment. We now know that this was not unlike the tobacco industry, that there was big industry funding a lot of this science.
No kidding. They had a prompt, and then they just went wild.
Well, as early as the 1960s, 5 big beer companies, I think the big ones, had gotten together to found the Foundation for Alcohol Research because they could see the stories that were being written about drunk driving and about the relation to social ills and what it's doing to your liver and what it's doing to your brain. And they thought, and just like the cigarette people, wouldn't it be nice if the occasional story said, it's not so bad, that the problem is addiction, not the substance itself. And what you want is to drink a healthy amount. And so they funded hundreds of studies and gave millions of dollars in grants to researchers. There are individual people who received 7-figure amounts from various beer and wine alcohol industries because they were doing the work that would say, maybe it's not so bad, or in this case, maybe it's even good. Maybe there's a little grape skin in there, and that grape skin might have some of that magical antioxidant.
Good for your heart. There's a kind of cultural rhapsody about the era of 5 martini lunches, and the thing is that
nostalgia,
anyone who's ever been around somebody who's had 5 martinis knows that it's a drag. I mean, they're not nice. 5 martinis makes you a mean person.
Here's how sheltered I am. I thought it was a 3 martini lunch. You've unlocked a new level of martini lunch that I did not know existed.
Maybe it was a 3 martini lunch.
Those of you drinking 5 bottles of wine, do not switch to a 5 martini lunch just because John encouraged
Even somebody with 3 martinis in them, I don't know. I guess you could still do advertising work.
Well, that's what we're going to say, that Don Draper has been loosened up and is going to come back and have the outside the box idea
you know what we should do?
Changes cornflakes forever.
We should make Volkswagens. We should mock them, and that'll sell them.
There are smoking gun cases of studies that were actually rigged by the vetting organizations that were just the industry, that were just saying, hey, we think your council should have these 2 scientists on it who are our guys that we've given millions of dollars of grants to. Or, hey, maybe you're actually doing the study wrong. Wouldn't it be better if you didn't correct for such and such?
What was it like the oil companies where they would establish a council of beautiful trees? We are the Council of Beautiful Trees, and we've determined that that oil consumption is good for the trees.
We're the doctors that drink a couple glasses of wine every night to unwind, and we're fine. Obviously,
Sure.
We feel great, and we haven't been pulled over lately. I mean that once, but that was kind of, the cop was being a dick.
Oh, they made it through medical school. Half in the bag.
And this all kind of leads to an America that manages to reframe the problem as alcoholism, that instead of looking at, the existential question of, if alcohol didn't exist, would you want it in your culture? Would you want to invent it? What is it doing to crime rates? What is it doing to poverty rates? Who is disproportionately hurt? What should we talk about domestic violence? What percentage of those? And instead of asking that question, really it becomes the scourge of alcoholism, because that's a way to say, boy, a tiny number of drinkers sure are ruining it for the rest of us.
Can confirm.
The rest of us that just want to watch the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were ruining it for everybody, John.
And still am.
But what happened subsequently to this is skepticism of the J curve itself.
Oh, because I heard the J curve used to explain a lot of things. I feel like the J curve then entered into popular culture, referring to it just became another
I guess in general, there is some idea that the happy medium is right. These are the years of Clintonian centrism. Right? And you don't want to be a weirdo who doesn't drink at all. And you don't want to be a weirdo who's lush. But clearly, there's a middle sensible ground. So I can see the J curve being used in all kinds of public health or even cultural arenas.
Yeah, it's a corrective to the overuse of the bell curve. It's a different curve that tells a different story.
There's a little dip where it's slightly good for you to have a slight moral failing. And you can imagine how in the Clinton years, people love to be told that, just one intern. Come on.
Per year. One intern a year.
But in fact, there had already been reason to be suspicious of the J curve. It just wasn't well-founded by the alcohol industry. As early as 1988, 3 years before Morley Safer's bombshell, a London epidemiologist named Gerald Shaper had started to read these early 1970s studies who were delighted to discover that a little drinking was good for the ticker, this cardioprotective effect. And he didn't like it. He did a study for the Lancer in 1988 where he reran some old data. But he said, what if the problem is that the people who don't drink, your baseline people, are not a good baseline? Because the people who don't drink maybe already have some health worry that has led to them cutting out alcohol altogether. These people don't drink because of a previous thing they're worried about.
Right.
Possibly a heart event, possibly a cardiac event.
Liver problems or cancer or whatever.
So what you're seeing there are people who are disproportionately,
prone to some other disease.
Right. And if you don't use those he calls it the sick quitter hypothesis, that the people at the far left of the J are quitters who were already sick. So their bad health does not come from their not drinking. It comes from all the drinking they did before they became a post-drinker.
Right.
And when he runs the data with this in mind, he finds the J just disappears. If you correct for previous cardiovascular disease, and these people did get asked if they had it, the J goes away.
Oh.
He publishes this and is immediately roasted. Come on. Because there's a whole industry handing out millions of dollars in grants to roast people like him. In 2006, some very good and serious work is done by a University of California, San Francisco researcher named Kay Middleton, whose specialty is addiction. I guess her priors are, she's worried about alcohol in society because she studies how addiction propagates, psychologically through families, but also through the body. And this is her bailiwick. And she goes back to every analysis of moderate drinking with cardiovascular health that she can find and does the same thing Gerald Shaper does and corrects it for past cardiovascular effect. And she cannot find a single study where the J curve holds. And she is roasted worse than Dr. Shaper. Like, people are explicitly saying, hey, okay there, Missy, why don't you settle down?
Yeah, why don't you have a glass of wine?
Exactly.
Relax.
Why don't you lighten up? Stop being such a school marm with your big boogeyman about addiction and let us have our Merlot.
This is 2006.
As late as 2006. And a German doctor says, in response to her study, says, many scientists or so-called scientists have great problems to discern between their emotions and the scientific data.
Says super drunk on beer German scientist.
Says a male scientist to a woman scientist saying, your emotions about are clouding your judgment. Like, why don't you look at the data and not so much about your scaremongering about basically, have a drink and relax.
Well, and there's always been a conflation of people within the recovery, people doing recovery science, and prudes and like.
And you've seen this in 12-step circles. And
Well, yeah, I mean recovery. Well, the thing is now, 2023, recovery and 12-stepping is so mainstreamed and so I don't know. I hesitate to say perverted, but it has become like the bell curve or any other social science fad.
on the ends of the curve, it gets used for everything.
Yeah, it's a cure all. It's there are 12-step programs for everything now. Television addiction, and so there are a lot of people referring to it as part of their identity culture. But in 2006, even that wasn't true. It was still seen as
These weirdos had not been able to find themselves on a subreddit and say, I think I'm addicted to porn.
Yeah, there was a lot of skepticism around willpower.
Yeah.
That these were moral failings, and I suppose that's still true.
So the early scientists, raising eyebrows about this whole thing, which had just reshaped an industry and a kind of the whole West's thinking about drinking. I don't need to feel bad about this anymore. I need to kind of embrace it. They're shouted down, but as the following decade goes on, more and more studies confirm these findings. Because people try to isolate resveratrol and, give people resveratrol pills, and nobody can find any health benefit to it. It turns out that you'd have to eat, a grape the size, a grape skin the size of the world's biggest ball of twine to get any effects. And a glass of red wine with dinner is not giving you meaningful antioxidants.
Don't give those frat boys any more ideas.
Sorry. Please do not drink wine made from a grape the size of the world's biggest ball of twine. I know you were all rushing out to do so.
Well, you can see 10 frat boys climbing on a giant grape. Like, we're doing it for charity.
How do you ferment it in the skin? Just leave it in the sun.
Yeah, that's how bears get drunk.
Grow a grape the size of James and the Giant Peach. Leave it in the sun. That's how bears get drunk. I'm sure that's exactly how it happens. The J curve is largely an illusion, or at least the effect was exaggerated. I think the current conventional wisdom is now that there is a slight, alcohol does have that kind of clean out your cholesterol effect, clean out your arteries effect, but it's so slight that you should drink a fraction of a glass a day, an amount which no one actually drinks. So it's not really a practical,
just a little bit
lifestyle prescription.
A little bit of wine in your stew.
Yes, that's what you should be doing.
Yeah,
you should be putting red wine in your beef stew and in your pasta sauce.
Now, in the last half dozen years, there have been
Marsala.
a lot of stories about how coffee has no negative side effects, and that you can drink kind of as much coffee as you want. And it often feels like one of these studies where
the hammer's about to fall.
Yeah, I mean, is the sample size 25 people or 2,500 people? But every time one of these studies comes out, all of the coffee drinkers in Seattle throw a parade because we're all concerned. Like, coffee's kind of nasty, and we drink it. I mean, I drink a pot of coffee a day. Please don't tell me it's bad for me. And all these articles that are like, it's not bad for you. It just feels so fun. And then there was an article just the other day that said ice cream was good for you.
Well, we should talk about the second act problem here in a lot of this stuff, which is a single finding catches the public eye. And we can see here a great vector of how all it took was a 11-minute, 60 Minutes report to basically change our culture overnight. There
were 49 other minutes to that show.
Nobody remembers the interview with Jacques Chirac. Sorry. But yeah, one study lodges in the public, he grows from a scientific, whatever it actually was, whatever the study or the meta-analysis it was, grows into a media story. Then that changes the culture in ways that could not have been foreseen by the designers of the study, and broader factors are left out. I think it happens so often that it's bad. It makes people skeptical of science.
Why are the French less susceptible to heart disease?
It's still not well understood. List of theories. The French drink water when we drink soda. The French do not just drink sugary liquids all day like many Americans do. They tend to walk faster. Even though Americans exercise more than the French, they walk at a brisk speed, which may be just perfect for aerobic exercise.
Okay.
They eat more fresh fruits and vegetables than we do. The smaller portions you already mentioned. There are two statistical ones that are very interesting to me. One is that heart disease just may be reported differently across the channel. So like there's 20% of things that would count as heart disease in England do not count as heart disease in France just because of what the government guidelines are on definitional stuff.
It feels like people in Europe are chonk, but very few are obese.
Well, here's the thing. There is a time lag in that.
Oh.
When you look at the, obesity rates in France and then you look at their health, their cardiovascular health might be a lagging indicator. It might be lagging by 20 years. So what you might be seeing in 20 years are the heart effects of what they're doing today. So when you say that the French are now, the French are eating, rich fatty diets and not getting fat, it may be that you need to look 20 years down the road. And in fact, obesity rates are on the rise. A lot of general health measures are down in France since these globally, but in France too. Like, they were, we were just seeing the dying embers of their good health that they had before Coca-Cola and
the Big Mac
and Le Big Mac and La Hostess invaded their culture. The real problem with these second act studies is they leave out the bigger picture. I remember a couple summers ago reading about how all the be scared of the sun stuff that hit in the 80s and 90s, SPF 50 or more, and totally turned the tables on the you better be bronzed or you're not healthy, put on that lotion that gets you a better suntan, may have been misguided because in fact, the death rate from skin cancer is pretty much infinitesimal, whereas the SPF might actually be keeping you from whatever the healthful effects of the sun are. Vitamin D production seems very hard to replace with supplements. So when you take into account a broader set of factors, the narrow truth that you have lowered skin cancer rates just gets dwarfed by the fact of all the other ill effects of not having some base level of sun exposure, whatever that is.
George Hamilton looks amazing with the tan, but if you were out in the sun all day, you talk about James and the Giant Peach.
I want to know. Yeah, I got to do it. But now after reading that and being kind of convinced by it, I do think more like I should get a little bit of a base tan this summer and maybe I won't burn. Whereas if you had asked a dermatologist that in 1990, they would have done a crucifix and said, do not say get a base tan so you don't burn. You're missing the point. Right. All ultraviolet is ultraviolet. I want to know what Google search you had to do to get you George Hamilton's name right there.
Wow.
Were you like 80s guy, bad suntan?
You're so smart. You watched me do a search. I said George suntan. And it not only came up with George Hamilton, only pictures of George Hamilton, but also his wiki. It's like a.
Did you erroneously believe his name might be George Suntan for a second, and you didn't want to say that on the air?
I was sitting there going, I was like George Majijaburb. I knew I could picture his face. I knew who it was,
but you didn't get a picture of George Michael on the beach at Ibiza.
No, I knew it wasn't George Michael. I was like George. He's one of these ubiquitous characters from the 70s that was synonymous with. Bronze tan.
If I Google George Suntan, how far do I have to go to get a picture of just George Bush with a tan? Or
let's see, George Suntan. It's all George Hamilton all the way down.
It's dozens of George Hamiltons.
George Hamilton looks back, or George Hamilton and Arkansas roots. Wow. Keep going.
Oh, I now get maybe a Hong Kong or a Hong Kong politician named George Go.
I have George Tan, who's chief of staff of America's sales strategy and operations.
Oh, hey, here's the Wham song Club Tropicana, which has the word suntan in the lyrics, and of course,
George
features George Michael. That's funny.
Weirdly, everybody here that under George Suntan, everybody on my page that is not George Hamilton is Chinese.
Yeah.
George Tan, George Zhou.
I mean, nobody made you search with Alibaba, but you're like, I just want them to have my data.
Alibaba and the 40 Thieves.
So, wait, is that the name of the Chinese search engine? Alibaba? Am I making that up?
Oh, no, that's Alibaba. Is that right?
I don't know.
What happens if I Google George Suntan Alibaba? Alibaba. And we get, it's all Chinese guys now.
So when it comes to alcohol in particular and the glass of wine a day, it turns out that the second order effects that are being ignored are enormous. And we should have known that even in 1991. Morley Safer saying, hey, your arteries are in slightly better shape if you have a glass of wine. I would want to know, hey, Morley, can you factor in drunk driving?
Yeah.
Hey, Morley, can you factor in,
how
cirrhosis?
much more likely am I to kill my family in a car accident?
And it turns out what is still not well understood among the public, but which scientists now know, is that drinking causes cancer.
Oh,
Drinking
ouch.
causes cancer a ton.
What?
If you survey people out, there's only 39% of Americans will tell you, yes, drinking causes cancer. I think I might have got that wrong. Did you know that?
No.
We can quantify it now to the degree that drinking probably causes about 75,000 extra cases of cancer in the U.S. every year. It's particularly bad for breast cancers. To the degree that drinking a bottle of wine is probably the same cancer-wise as smoking 5 cigarettes if you're a man. And it's the same as smoking 10 cigarettes if you're a woman, or 10 Virginia Slims, I guess.
Wow.
So, because those are the only cigarettes that women smoke.
Yeah, Virginia Slims. That's right. No, and Moore 100s.
You gotta have more on them. Benson and Hedges?
Okay, all right, that's 3.
So you're, by saying, yeah, like, look at this moderate, everybody wants to know about the moderate improvement that will let them feel good about their drinking a little bit too much wine with dinner. Nobody wants to know about the 75,000 extra cases of breast cancer or whatever.
Well, I've been doing a little research on this since I'm now, as of this show airing, I'm now eligible to live in like senior only.
Are you 55?
I will be 55. Well, I am now as this show airs. And so at 55, I can move into the villages in Florida and just drive a golf cart around.
I'm going to Google John Suntan and see if it has you.
55 is the traditional age of retirement or not retirement. That would be 65, right? But 55, if I had started a job at 20, I'd have 35 years in. I'd be ready to retire.
I just sent you a poster I saw last night that reminded me of you because I'm like, did John turn 55 last year or this year?
Yeah, I'm 100% old now, and 100% never going to retire.
And you look at this thing. You are able to get cart clam perks at Ivar's at Seattle
cart clam
seafood restaurant.
When I moved into this neighborhood, I looked at a condo. That was 2 years ago. That was 55 and older, and it was a really cool condo. And I was like, well, I'm 53. They were like, sorry, man. It's 55 cutoff.
You'd be ruining the vibe. You're like the guy that's not drinking at the party.
I'd be like,
because you don't have that extra 2 years of senility.
Yeah, they're like, no. Your stereo would be 20% too loud.
They're worried about you scoring all the. These places are full of single women, John, and they don't want to compete with you
because all their husbands have died.
That is correct. That is not a nice reason.
One thing I learned though in doing all this now I'm an old guy research is that falling deaths is the leading cause of injury-related death for adults over 65.
And guess what? Alcohol and falling, not unrelated.
There you go.
Not unrelated. But it's overstated. I'm looking at the numbers now. Like maybe COVID will cause a little blip here or maybe reverse it. But in fact, America is getting more and more sober every year. 30% of Americans didn't drink in 2010. It's like 40% today. And granted, a lot of that is because people are switching to legal weed. I think I would like to see quantified how many are.
Well, but you also could make a case that America is more and more lame all the time. Maybe there's a correlation.
Maybe if they were just cooler and they'd like just have a bud and stop being such narcs.
Yeah. Well, although I can usually tell which posts on Facebook were written by somebody that had 4 glasses of wine. They are not the good ones.
There's basically 3 Americas. The country's divided into roughly equal thirds. A third of America doesn't drink at all. A third drinks excessively. And then there's the other third.
Really?
Yeah, like roughly a third of America drinks too much. Like, either they'll drink too much in a week or they'll binge drink. Because the government defines, if you're binge drinking once a month, that is termed excessive.
That's true in Alcoholics Anonymous too. It's recognized there that there are a ton of different versions of being an alcoholic. And if you blackout drink twice a year, it's considered like that's kind of
it does seem like a lifestyle problem. Yeah. If I had that from something else, I would go to a doctor.
If you're like, I don't drink at all, and then every 6 months I
lose a night.
or 3 days.
Yeah. I lose a weekend. And it's actually a 10%, 10% slice of America buys 60% of the alcohol.
Okay.
I mean, that's
are the boozers.
That's an economic law you see with lots of stuff, but it's very pronounced that the majority of American alcohol purchases are the same 10% of us.
There's only 10% of the people like angrily actuallying you online either.
Yeah. And this era is over. This nice little Morley, this warm, convivial moment. Like you mentioned, there's an hour and a half after dinner starts when the conversation is lively and ebullient before things start to turn. There was a beautiful 20 years or so where we thought, no, probably more, 25 to 30 years when we thought we could drink all the Merlot we wanted.
Or at least a glass of wine after dinner or with dinner.
No, I think you could. I think people are drinking more than that and still feeling good about it,
Yeah,
probably.
Agreed.
And now the science has gone back. The World Health Organization has backed off. I don't know if the U.S. has put the wording back in, but Canada did earlier this year.
When I do that food pyramid episode in the next 3 weeks, we'll see.
We'll get to the bottom of it.
And that concludes One Glass of Red Wine, entry 866.DE3233. Certificate number 13766 in the omnibus. Futurelings, in the unlikely event that social media still exists in your era, stay off of it. Leave it alone completely. It's terrible for you.
Don't think one post a day after dinner is going to be good for your ticker.
Here's what you should do. You should listen to Omnibus, which is not social media and really isn't the internet.
It's parasocial media. Yeah, no, you found this in the ground, carved into a granite stela.
That's right. But, podcasts are radio. It's radio. It's not social media. It's not even the internet. You just listen to it through the internet. It's the best thing about it.
You feel like you're not listening to lame drive time DJs, but you are. John and I are just lame drive time DJs riffing.
Hey, it's DJ and the Wolf.
Let's look at the traffic every 10 minutes on the 9s.
And then you should go to our Patreon at patreon.com/omnibusproject. Not part of the internet at all, but lots of other great content there. And, for a small donation every month, you can be part of the best version of social media, which is just hanging out with us over on our Patreon.
There is a J curve where not giving to Omnibus is bad for you. And the people who give too much to a podcast, maybe also a little suspect. I'm not gonna lie.
No, that's
not gonna lie.
No.
I don't want anyone listening to change their donation, but
you can give $1,000 a month.
But if I met you at a party,
podcast.
I might raise an eyebrow to be like, really? You like Dax Shepard that much?
Well, don't give your money to Dax Shepard.
Give it to Joe Rogan.
Give it to the Omnibus Project at gmail.com directly in an envelope full of hundreds. But if you want to do it through our Patreon, it's patreon.com/omnibusproject.
I'm just saying there's a little healthy bottom of the J in the middle where tens of thousands of people are listening to me right now that are not getting the full healthful benefits of Omnibus because we do a monthly show that's full of resveratrol.
That's right. And you also, you and Mindy both take great pains to post all of our show notes, all the books we receive, all of the mail. You take pictures of it and put it up there, and it is a great resource I use all the time.
Speaking of the mail, we just got a thank you card. I don't know if you remember this. We got invited to the Samantha and Daniel's wedding.
I do remember.
We did not go, but we read the invitation online, and someone sent them a gift from us, I believe.
Hooray.
I think this is the wedding I'm thinking of. Someone sent them a board game from us.
Yeah, well done, you.
And now we got, without even attending or giving them anything off their registry, we just got a thank you gift from Sammy and Danielle.
For the gift giver who then, your gift got paid forward to us in the form of a thank you.
I hope the gift giver is on the Patreon so you can see the thank you card that you should have gotten that instead went to us. What I'm wondering is if we mention the thank you card, are they going to keep sending us thank you cards?
Sure. I hope they do.
We'll never get out of this.
Where they're sending those to is P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington, 98155. Ken is still on X.
Ken's on X right now.
Lol. Oh, that's a raffle. Raffle.
That's how I get uninhibited and ebullient at dinner.
I got permanently banned from X back when it was Twitter. And I think both Ken and I are on Blue Sky and Lexapro and
all the weird ones,
Lexor and Lonigan and all the other ones.
We're on Lonigan. It's where dirty Irish cops post, and we want to see it.
But I realized that I'm not posting on them, although I am on Instagram at John Roderick, and Ken is only lurking on Instagram, right? You barely are there.
I'm barely there.
And we both go on the Facebook page for the Futurelings every once in a while and angrily denounce people who are wrong.
If Instagram becomes the new Twitter, I am going to have to be on Instagram. You know, if that becomes the place where culture happens, I'm going to have to do it.
I know.
But I'm not looking forward to it.
And what are you going to do? You're just going to post pictures of Mindy's Le Creuset pots.
Honestly, I've mostly been posting pictures on the microblogging platforms forever.
Yeah. Right.
Like that's because you'll see something during the day and be like, I'm going to show people that.
Well,
That's what Instagram's for.
It's a weird Seattle street sign.
There you go.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. You can email us at theomnibusproject@gmail.com.
All the good podcasts end. So that's pretty much it.
So pretty much that's all I can remember.
Listeners, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come, but if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may be our final word. So that's pretty much it. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.